The Nintendo Entertainment System is well known for its wide array of bizarre peripherals that go beyond just standard controllers. Some official, some unofficial, some beloved, some despised as the wastes of plastic that they definitely were, but none more iconic and recognizable than the legendary Zapper. The Zapper was a frequent bundle buddy of the NES, packaged together in the deluxe set, the action set, and the power set, as well as being sold separately, which is why it's an extremely common retro gaming find. If your grandma has an old box of NES stuff in the basement that hasn't been touched in 10 years, chances are it's got a Zapper in it, and chances are it was used specifically for the Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt cartridge and nothing else. Back in my very early days of game collecting, I found one such grandma box at a garage sale, a bundle of my very own. The box contained 2 mangled controllers, a long-suffering damaged NES, which I would later dub the NES because of how inept it was at reading cartridges, a small stack of games of varying quality, and a Zapper, all for $25. As luck would have it, when I took it back home, I happened to plug it into the only TV in my house that would have been capable of playing Zapper games. You see, Zappers don't work on most modern screens and require a CRT to function. Naturally, the first game I popped in to test was that famous Mario Duck Hunt cartridge. The only thing I really knew about Duck Hunt was that infamous dog, surely one of the most openly hated characters in all of fiction. I was fully prepared to get pissed off, which is why I was so shocked when it was actually kind of a blast. It got me thinking, what's the deal with this gun anyway? Is it just for Duck Hunt? Well, no. In total, out of roughly 700 officially licensed NES games, 16 titles used the Zapper peripheral. You may have heard of some of them, like Hogan's Alley and Wild Gunman, possibly because of their presence in certain modern Nintendo series, like Super Smash Bros. And WarioWare. Recently, I've developed a bit of an obsession with the Zapper. I can't really explain why, but I just had to know everything about it. I ended up buying all 16 games and playing them for myself just to see what that little world is like, and let me tell you, there's a lot of crazy stuff in there. If you would indulge me, I'd like to usher you into my little Zapper world by going through each game's quirks and history in detail. I feel confident there'll be enough interesting and amusing fun facts to keep you going through several lunch breaks at least. Starting our list is easily the most iconic and recognizable Zapper game, Duck Hunt. I had to make a judgment call here, seeing as Duck Hunt, Hogan's Alley, and Wild Gunman were all launch titles for the NES, giving them all the same October 1985 release date, but Duck Hunt's status as a pack-in game cements its status as the leader of the bunch. Most people who have played it on the aforementioned Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt cartridge, but there's also the lesser-known Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt World Class Track Meet cartridge, as well as simply a solo Duck Hunt one. I have all 3 because there's something deeply wrong with me. Duck Hunt is an extremely simple target shooting game. The title screen has 3 game options, 1 duck, 2 ducks, and clay shooting. The iconic scene most people are familiar with is the one you find in both of the duck modes, where you shoot ducks out of the air in sets of 10 at a time to the seemingly endless mirth of the implied unseen protagonist's faithful retriever, a dog whose mocking laughter apparently scarred the minds of a generation. 1 duck mode is pretty piss easy, but has a multiplayer component a lot of people don't know about. If you plug a controller into port 1, you can actually control the duck's movement and try to juke out the person holding the Zapper, although even that's a big ask until later rounds where the ducks become much faster. 2 Ducks mode is self-explanatory and a little more engaging, but it still gets old after just a few rounds. If there was some kind of setting like you see in Tetris likes to set the starting speed of the ducks, maybe you could be spared the monotony of the first 5 or so rounds, but sadly there is no such feature. In both duck modes, sometimes they'll sprinkle a little variety into your life with off-colored ducks that grant extra score when shot, but otherwise what you see is what you get. There's no real ending to any of the modes in Duck Hunt, but the gradually increasing speed of the ducks and the requirement of ducks per round needed to pass means you'll probably game over eventually. However, if you somehow get all the way up to round 99 and beat it, the game freaks out a bit when trying to go into round 100. It displays round 0 on screen and shifts into creepypasta nightmare mode, where the ducks go unmanageably fast, or even better, never show up in the first place. The dog will just giggle at you repeatedly without an actual opportunity to shoot ducks, meaning it's seemingly impossible to pass the 10 duck requirement to clear the level. Although I have seen some footage of people managing to hit some of those crazy ducks when they're available.
Holy crap, I hit one!
I know the dog is widely hated, but for whatever reason its mocking laughter never really bothered me. Maybe I've been desensitized by excerpts from the 3 decades of video games that came out after Duck Hunt mercilessly taunting and mocking players, or maybe it's more linked to attention span, seeing as Duck Hunt usually gets boring for me before it gets difficult. Maybe it was just something about that specific cocktail of circumstances that is, it's the 80s, you're 9 years old, this thing is laughing at you, and you have a gun that sparked the rage in people. The really fun mode in Duck Hunt is clay shooting, where you shoot clay pigeons instead of ducks. Not only does it lack the cruelty inherent in hunting game, but it's also just a little more engaging for me. The way the targets shrink as they get more and more distant makes it challenging, and it's a pretty clean-looking visual effect for the first days of the NES. It's always been a little unclear to me with Zapper games exactly how far you should be from the screen. The manual for both the Zapper itself and many of its games say you should be standing approximately 6 feet from the TV, with this little diagram that, bless its heart, it's trying to be informative and show perspective, but I don't really know what I'm looking at here. It looks like this kid is in the lobby for Tiny Huge Island. Also, I can't help but notice that the whole scene looks a lot more Japanese in a lot of the game manuals over the Zapper one. Not only do those shorts and that straight black hair stick out to me, but they're also holding a gun that looks significantly more like the Japanese version of the Zapper, the Famicom beam gun, which in sharp contrast to the Zapper's retro-futuristic laser gun vibe, just kinda looks like a revolver. Seems like for the Zapper manual they hit this poor kid with the white beam. It also says in here that you shouldn't point the Zapper at the sun? What happens if you do? Anyway, approximately 6 feet is appended by saying it really depends on the size of your TV. Even at a maximum distance, I find that the accuracy of the Zapper is shockingly good and even overly lenient at times. There are some shots that don't feel like they should have hit, but connect regardless, although there are also times it misses when it feels like you were dead on. This is probably due to the way the Zapper detects hits on a TV, which I'll get into in more detail later. Overall, Duck Hunt is an inoffensive game, but nothing to write home about, and it makes me wonder if any of these games are going to be truly exemplary if the most well-known one is so bare bones. Aiming and shooting at the targets has an inherently satisfying quality to it, but with this little variance in what you're aiming at, it gets old fast. And going for high scores seems like much more of an endurance test than anything. There's not even any music besides the repetitive jingle indicating you scored a hit and a slightly longer one between rounds. It's fine, the game is iconic, and there's actually a lot more to be said about it, but I'm gonna hold out on going into that until a bit later. Hogan's Alley is our second of the trio of launch title Zapper games, and they really do go together beyond just having similar looking box art. This one also has 3 game modes, the first of which is a bit boring, the second being similar but more challenging, and the third being the totally different, actually fun game mode. In Game A, you're shown sets of 3 firing range cutouts and given a brief period of time to shoot the ones categorized as gangsters while avoiding hitting non-gangsters. The top of the screen displays the number of seconds you have to shoot the crooks and spare the innocents, and once the time runs out, the standees turn sideways and you can't hit them anymore. The game gradually decreases the amount of time you have until you eventually screw up 10 times and get a game over. Comparing it to Duck Hunt, this game is less about accuracy and more about making simple, quick judgment calls under a time limit. I don't really find it as enjoyable as any of the modes in Duck Hunt, even though it's certainly more challenging. It's the civilians that really get me, especially when the hit detection of the Zapper bugs out a little and seems to hit a character you weren't really aiming at. I like how the different civilians exist in subtle difficulty levels based on how much they'll make you accidentally shoot them. The lady is in a totally different color palette and lacks the cartoonish proportions and facial expressions of all the male characters, so she's easy to recognize. Then there's the poor professor, who looks uncannily similar at a glance to Gangster A, with his brown hat and dopey frown mimicking the gangster's brown hair and menacing scowl. Finally, you have the cop, who, all ACAB bias aside, really does look like he fits right in with the crooks. Don't you just want to reach for his gun? Game B is basically just those same standees moving around in a small city environment that you scroll and loop through repeatedly, racking up a higher and higher score until you get 10 misses. It's very repetitive and doesn't do much for me, but it's at least more interesting than Game A. Just like Duck Hunt, some music beyond the occasional jingle would have gone a long way. I have to wonder if they avoided music because of limitations of the Famicom and NES sound chip, not wanting the sound effects of the gun cutting into the music due to how audio channels worked at the time. Although other Nintendo games from the same era certainly don't seem to be afraid of doing this. Game C, Trick Shot, is where it's at. This is the origin of the famous Duck Hunt neutral B in Smash, the can. I always thought it was an oil can and said the word oil on the side, but in the game it says CV, which I personally can't derive any meaning from if there even is any. It's a can of resumes? I looked through a lot of pictures of retro soup cans and soda cans and motor oil cans, Japanese and American alike, and I didn't find anything involving the initial CV, nor much that truly resembled the can in Hogan's Alley, the closest being the iconic Campbell's soup can design and the Texaco motor oil can, so who knows why it says that. As Smash players could probably guess, Game C is about juggling these cans in the air. They start on the right side of the screen with leftward momentum, and you want to keep them as low as possible so they land in the highest scoring slot on the left wall, the 5000, right at the bottom. There's this little dinky platform near the 5000 referred to as the safety platform by the manual. Perhaps an ironic name because it's more of an obstacle than anything else. If you land on it, sure, it doesn't count as a miss, but it nets you a measly 100 points, a drop in the bucket to pro trickshot players. This mode started rubbing me the wrong way over time due to the way it struggled to decide which can, if any, you hit when two of them got near each other. I can't really prove the existence of this phenomenon, and it could just be a trickshot skill issue, but I personally feel quite certain there's a specific bug that happens when hitboxes overlap in this game, and that at least one later Zapper game by the same developers seems to have been able to fix it. It's understandable that in some of the earliest Zapper games they might not have worked out some of the kinks in how it was programmed quite yet. In the end, with my many Johns aside, it does feel cool to occasionally expertly juggle 2 to 3 different things in the air with only gunshots, when it works. After the development of the Famicom, but before it came over to the States in the form of the NES, Nintendo produced a series of modular arcade cabinets called the Nintendo Versus Systems. These cabinets utilized the same hardware used in a Famicom, with modified versions of Famicom games. This includes some Zapper games, like Duck Hunt and Hogan's Alley, as well as a few other games later in this list. I remember seeing these in various arcades in my life and always wondering if they were even official or if it was some janky homebrewed arcade system made from a modded NES. Turns out they are official, and they feature versions of games that are, while extremely similar to their NES counterparts featuring mostly the exact same sprites and sounds, somewhat different. Not only do they all feature the crucial versus modes, but the way the levels are arranged is just a little more engaging. They've got more of a structure to them, mixing all the game modes together one round after the other. Versus Duck Hunt actually also features a unique bonus level not seen in the NES game, where ducks pour out of the bushes en masse and the dog leaps up in the air trying to bite them. This mode is most notable for the fact that you can actually shoot the dog, which is then immediately confirmed to have done real lasting damage to his body, to the extreme pleasure of 1,000 YouTube commenters screaming for blood. Both of these arcade versions also feature a goofy little animation that says break time that comes up occasionally to give you a breather. The Duck Hunt one is a lot like the first cutscene in the original Pac-Man, featuring the dog and a duck chasing each other back and forth, and the Hogan's Alley one bizarrely gives the Professor Standy legs and sees him waddling away running from gunfire. The changes aren't exactly mind-blowing, but I really wish the NES versions had this stuff and were arranged in this way. It just feels like a more natural way to make all the game's content a little more cohesive. It's like the arcade versions are delightful little well-put-together sandwiches, and the NES games are infinite buffet tables of each individual ingredient. Now, while playing Hogan's Alley, I kept finding myself thinking, who's Hogan? For some reason in my head I always thought this guy was Hogan because he's on the cover, but according to the manual he's Gangster C, or Gang C on the demo screen. My search for Hogan led me down quite the rabbit hole, which began forebodingly with a Wikipedia disambiguation page listing the various things in the world called Hogan's Alley. A comic strip, a magazine, a movie, the name for a specific part of a submarine, a couple country clubs known for hosting a famous golfer named Ben Hogan, an actual literal alley in Vancouver, BC, and most prominently, an FBI training facility located in Quantico, Virginia.
Are there any other
Hogan's Alley
I should know about?
That FBI thing sounded like a lead, but looking into it I couldn't help but notice that the training facility allegedly opened in 1987, a few years after Hogan's Alley the video game came out. It was from here that I learned that Hogan's Alley is no one specific place, and is instead sort of a moniker given to many immersive tactical courses, originating from one developed in 1926 at a place called Camp Perry in Ohio. Online, I could only ever find this one image of the original Hogan's Alley, clearly a photograph taken from a book out of context, so I got the book and discovered to my joy that there was a second photo as of yet unseen by the net at large. For your viewing pleasure, I've provided both images in higher quality scans. The oldest and most famous instance of the phrase Hogan's Alley comes from a now ancient comic strip from the 1890s of the same name, featuring an apparently famous character, the Yellow Kid, who I'd never seen before in my life and would now quite like to unsee with great haste. The often political comic strip usually featured city slum environments set in a fictionalized New York City. Now this is just an educated guess rather than a sourced fact, but I can see how Camp Perry's fake street side with characters standing in the windows and door frames might have been reminiscent of the comic strip to whoever was in charge of naming it. I wasn't able to find information on where the name Hogan comes from in terms of the comic, and for all I know, author Richard F. Oatcult took any knowledge of it to the grave in 1928 when he passed away in the city of Flushing, New York. With all that aside, Hogan's Alley is another mixed experience with relatively well-made and refined ideas, despite its simplicity. I think it was a bit of a stroke of genius to make the actual aesthetics of the game resemble a gun range with cutouts of characters, because that means they didn't really have to bother with animating them, besides wiggling their sprites around and spinning around when you shoot them. That's a nice little example of unique aesthetic choices trumping technical limitations. The limitations of the Zapper are beginning to bother me, though. The third and final Zapper-compatible launch title, Wild Gunman, takes us to a Wild West setting with a game centered around quick reflexes over accuracy. The first two modes are the Outlaw modes, where you have a quick draw timing challenge facing off against either one or two goofy-looking cowboy crooks. It tells you up here how fast each guy is going to be, and you just have to beat that time. So in 2 Outlaws mode, which needless to say at this point is much more worth playing than the first mode, you have to prioritize the Outlaw with the lower time requirement, but this gets a little tricky because you can only shoot them after they say fire, and they can individually say it at different times or sometimes not at all. Shooting a guy before he says fire is pretty funny because they don't actually get hit. Their indignance at your blatant disregard for the rules manifests as a force field of psychic energy surrounding their body which effortlessly repels the bullet as they shuffle awkwardly off the side of the screen like a South Park character. This animation isn't unacceptably bad for early NES, but it makes me appreciate Hogan's Alley's general shooting gallery framing device even more than I already did. According to the manual, you're supposed to actually draw your Zapper when the Outlaw says fire, which I interpreted as simply keeping the gun by my side, but putting it in my pants pocket like a holster was kind of fun too, though a lot more difficult. Alright. Let me saunter on into town. What do we have here? Criminal scum? Yeah! That's awesome. I'm kind of struggling to think of other video games I've played that had some kind of external rule like this. It's already easy to cheat with the Zapper by getting closer to the screen than you're supposed to be, and with Wild Gunman 1 Outlaw mode, if you just keep your gun up at all times, you could probably keep playing it indefinitely and only lose when you pass out from boredom. The hitbox for hitting the Outlaw is the entire screen, and the lowest the Outlaws ever go in terms of reaction time is 0.4 seconds, which I was able to pretty easily clear whenever it showed up, and my reaction time isn't exactly amazing. The draw aspect is definitely the main focus of these game modes, and what makes it difficult, and also what makes it feel a lot more like a toy than a video game. That feeling is warranted too by this game's surprisingly storied history. Have a seat now, and let me tell you a little bit about a man named Gunpei Yokoi. Yokoi is something of a legend in the gaming world, the developer and designer of numerous iconic toys, games, peripherals, and everything in between. Some of his most well-known inventions include the Zapper and the goddamn Game Boy, which is basically the gaming equivalent of inventing the car. Not everything he made was necessarily a hit, but his shrewd business sense and seemingly endless well of imaginative ideas for toys and games made him legendary. You could talk about his legacy till the cows come home. It's actually basically impossible to play a modern Nintendo game without feeling his influence in some way, shape, or form. But I want to focus on a small, lesser-known part of his past, the development of a now ancient arcade machine developed in the early 70s, Wild Gunman. That's right, Wild Gunman (1985), while not being featured on the Nintendo Versus system, is actually something of a remake, or perhaps a demake, of an arcade game that came out over 10 years prior. Utilizing full-motion video recordings of cowboys in a Hollywood Western-type setting, Wild Gunman (1974) plays similarly, despite being so visually different. It's a quick-draw timing challenge, and the eyes of the cowboys in the footage even gleam the same way they do in the NES game. There's almost no existing footage of this machine being played, and it certainly doesn't have the same fame or legacy as even the NES version, let alone other famous Nintendo arcade games, but it's a fascinating gaming artifact. I mean, most people associate FMV games with the 90s and early 2000s, not the 70s. If you'd like to learn more about this game and Nintendo's history making various cowboy-themed toys and games with Gunman in the name, I wholeheartedly recommend this video by Critical Kate, which is very well made and entertaining, and goes into a lot more detail than I did. There's a link in the description. I neglected to mention during the Duck Hunt segment that the game has a similar status of being a bit of a remake of an older electronic toy, also named Duck Hunt, which is yet another gaming ancestor from the 70s, almost resembling what would later come to be known as a home console. It's a very simplistic toy, but must have been far out for kids in '76. I also have to wonder if the laser clay shooting system, an arcade game about shooting clay pigeons that defunct bowling alleys were outfitted with in 1973, might have also had an influence on Duck Hunt in the form of the clay shooting mode. Gunpei Yokoi's involvement with all of these projects is a pretty convincing through line, although the thing about the laser clay shooting system inspiring Game C and Duck Hunt is just pure speculation from me. Circling back to Gunman, it's got a third game mode a lot like Hogan's Alley's second mode, where you shoot crooks as they show up in the door and windows of a saloon. It's not exceptional, but it is fun for a couple minutes. In general, it's another fine game with the kind of simplicity and polished presentation we've come to expect from these early first-party Zapper titles. The cartoonish, exaggerated Wild West setting is fun, and I like how the score you earn from winning duels with outlaws is framed in-game as being reward money. The game's toy-like attributes are bizarre from a modern standpoint, but I think it's really endearing. Coming out a year after the release of the NES, but still sporting the simplistic cartridge art of the earliest games in the NES library, Gumshoe, not you, centers around the titular dick named Mr. Stevenson in his efforts to save his daughter Jennifer from the clutches of the sinister King Dom. His mission is to reach the rightmost side of several side-scrolling levels and collect 5 gems called the Black Panthers? You need the diamonds to fulfill a ransom sent by King Dom, and at the end of the game, King Dom basically wins. Like, Stevenson gets his daughter back, and it looks like he shoots King Dom's hat off his head, making him get a goofy, pissed-off expression, but it really seems as though the whole ransom plan went off basically without a hitch. Especially because, according to the game, when you beat it and it loops back to the beginning, King Dom pulls the exact same scheme again, that very same day. Comically pathetic showing from a crime fighter is all I'm saying. It's funny, the game itself is kind of like Flappy Bird with the Zapper, so like, that'd be like Zappy Bird. Get it? Stevenson walks to the right automatically at a set speed, and you can make him jump by shooting him. You shoot the funny Gumshoe so he touches balloons that give you bullets, and you protect him from flying bottles, birds, cars, and all sorts of other crap while navigating around hazards, most commonly these really annoyingly placed skull blocks. Playing this game gave me flashbacks to Trick Shot in Hogan's Alley. The Zapper just doesn't seem to work as well when multiple targets are on screen. This really irritates me in a game like this, where a single missed shot frequently means death. The frequency with which you have to shoot the Zapper also gets really irritating, due to the way the whole screen freezes and flashes black for a tiny split second every time you pull the trigger. In fact, if I'm being honest, while I really like the original idea and certain aspects of it, I found this game to be extremely irritating and brutally difficult, and I didn't get very far before giving up. I learned while writing this script that you can actually restart a stage from a game over by simply shooting the Zapper at the words game over. That's a rare mercy on the NES and would have been nice to know, but it still didn't make me want to go back and grind through the whole game. More than a few times in this video, I'm going to be using footage from other channels on YouTube, like speedruns and long plays, and you can find the sources down in the description. The Gumshoe from Gumshoe moves very slowly, and the fact that under usual circumstances you die in a single hit, combined with the occasional inaccuracy of the Zapper, makes for a pretty frustrating experience of redoing these slow, uneventful bits over and over again, and then just dying to the falling boulders or these skull blocks repeatedly. The way you lose 100% of your forward momentum when you hit a ceiling is especially frustrating, and I also noted a few times where it seemed like one shot hit multiple things, which would have been real nice when juggling cans in Hogan's Alley, but just ends up being a pain in the ass in this game. Anyway, at the end of each section you get an opportunity to nab one of the Black Panthers, and if you miss it, that ending section of the level loops until you grab it. Now you might be thinking, this is cool and all, but is this an accurate depiction of what detective work looks like? Well, kinda. He's really more like your typical spy character than anyone who does any actual detecting, getting led along with a number of messages received at various points throughout the levels, including this tribal character, the islander named Adamozde. I wonder why this guy didn't show up as a spirit in World of Light. Judging from the letter at the beginning of the game, I think it's King Dom giving you these messages in order to carry out the mission. Eventually you get a machine gun from a phone booth hilariously stationed in the middle of the jungle and use it to engage the monster, Zuli, not you, who dies and explodes, revealing the final Black Panther. Gumshoe walks to the right about 20 feet, where for some reason there's a weird castle-like room that I guess is where King Dom lives, and you deliver the gems and the day is won. I like this little message from Stevenson that says, "Thanks a million" when you win. It's a phrase that'd be used again at the end of the credits of one of my personal favorite NES games, Zelda 2. Something I had no idea about when I played this is the secret areas hidden in each level. In order to reach these, you need to get 20 balloons in the level before reaching a certain scripted point. I actually got the one in the first level without even knowing this was a mechanic. These areas are particularly frenetic, but also provide the chance for bonuses, like power-ups and extra ammo. Gumshoe is notable for being the first NES game to be exclusive to Western audiences, despite being a straight-from-the-source pure Japanese-developed Nintendo R&D 1 gig. That's the same team that produced numerous iconic Nintendo franchises, including Mario, Wario, Metroid, Fire Emblem, Kid Icarus, and everyone's favorite, Famicom Detective Club. They also produced the first 3 games in this list, as well as one I'll be talking about later. Looking at their ludography, I'm struck by how many of my absolute favorite Nintendo games are on here. I know to some these may seem a little silly to be speaking of as though they were high art, but playing these games as an adult, particularly those further down the list, really impresses upon you the sheer ingenuity and intelligence and experience this team was working with. They were real pros. Not that you'd necessarily know it by playing Gumshoe, but I give it a pass for being of its time. If you're wondering why this game doesn't have a Japanese version, I'm afraid I don't really have an answer for you. Finding information on old, lesser-known NES titles is tricky enough when it's in a language I can actually understand, but the fact that it was never on the Famicom, paired with the fact that it also appeared on the Nintendo Versus system, means that Gumshoe was an arcade game before it was ever available on consoles. The arcade version is barely different, with a few small graphical changes, the removal of this armor power-up you can get from the bird enemy, and different music in Level 2. I'm just making an educated guess here, but I assume the music was changed for fear of legal issues that might arise from its striking similarity to the 1985 hit British rock single Walking on Sunshine by Katrina and the Waves. While googling Gumshoe Walking on Sunshine didn't yield many results, it did lead me to the cutting room floor page for this game, which made the same connection and revealed to my mortal eyes a scrapped mobster-looking enemy only present in the files for the arcade version. This sprite set also contains a pantsless version and what would appear to be a version without underwear. I'm censoring it to be safe, but trust me, you're not missing much. In conclusion, Gumshoe is a very bizarre game with a lot of neat ideas that don't really come together into something playable. To me, at least. The music is irritating, it's got an awkward, buggy control scheme with terrible game feel, and playing it for extended periods of time is legitimately headache-inducing, even for those of us who can look at it without having a seizure. Also, looking at the cartridge art, I have to wonder if they were trying to sell this game on its passing resemblance to Super Mario Bros., with this recolored version of the armadillo enemy from the game looking like a bootleg Bowser. Despite its issues, it still deserves at the very least to be praised for its uniqueness, being a Zapper platformer in a lineup of, spoiler alert, mostly variants on the concept of a shooting gallery. You could even argue that over the course of gaming history, Gumshoe-like games would eventually evolve into the popular genre of auto-runners we have today. Next up we have Gotcha the Sport, which is a paintball, capture-the-flag game with an Archie Comics-looking guy on the cover. To fans of the AVGN, you may recognize the company that published this game. That's right, it's recurring villain of the NES library, LJN. I'm not here to make the call that every LJN game is terrible, but from what few I have played and streamed, check my obsessively maintained spreadsheet of games for more info, I understand why they have a reputation for making low-quality games. That's why it was surprising to me that Gotcha the Sport reached the dizzying heights of basically inoffensive for an NES Zapper game. This is a very basic game that serves as little more than a shooting gallery. Gameplay comprises 3 horizontally scrolling stages that you have to traverse to the end of, grab a flag, and bring it back to the start. And they don't auto-scroll. You have to do it manually with the controller in one hand while blasting away with the Zapper in the other. This makes me feel like a total dick when I'm playing it, but it's not an awful control scheme. Most of the time there's little reason not to just hold in one direction until you hit a wall, so it's not like you're multitasking super hard or anything. Once you beat a stage, you're taken to the next one, and another after that, and then the 3 levels loop, seemingly forever. Usually the most exciting thing that happens is an enemy steals your team's flag each round, and you have to keep an eye on the minimap on the way back so you can stop to make sure you take them out before heading left again. It's quite easy, to the point where it gets old after the first loop. Probably the worst aspect of this game is that every time an enemy takes aim at you, it interrupts the music to play a little danger tone, and then when it goes back to the music, the song resets from the start, making it so the entire time you're playing this game, even on the easiest difficulty, you're constantly hearing nothing but the first few seconds of the music. Classic LJN hijinks. Speaking of LJN, you might have been a little caught off guard by this game's bizarre name. Like, what do you mean, Gotcha the Sport? Is the word paintball one of those terms like Kleenex or Band-Aid that's technically a brand name they didn't want to infringe on? Well, as it turns out, this game was actually one of, if not the first LJN title on the NES, and it was a bit of a cross-promotion of a toy line by LJN under their strange, interactive video games series, deriving part of the name from Entertech, the name of LJN's line of toy guns for kids. The bulk of Entertech's products were water guns that lacked the distinctive marks most toy weapons come with in order to distinguish them from real firearms at a glance. This lack of orange tips and bright-colored plastic attracted the ire of most basically intelligent people who understood the many problems that come with manufacturing kids' toys that look like deadly weapons. As a brief aside to this current aside, the Zapper itself also came under fire for looking a bit too much like a real gun. Little to the left. That one. Originally they were all gray, but around 1988-1989, Nintendo started releasing them in this more iconic, almost totally bright orange version, likely in accordance to tightening restrictions on toy weapons at the time. I've heard some vague rumors about Nintendo facing a lawsuit from a former soldier over these gray Zappers, but I couldn't find any official source about it, leading me to think this specific story is probably apocryphal. The Gotcha the Sport weapons were also brightly colored, but as far as I can tell they were basically just paintball guns, which made the company fall under more criticism because they were just selling paintball guns to children. Makes sense to me! Let's get back to that name, though, because there are a few more layers to this particular iceberg. On May 3rd, 1985, the unsuspecting American populace was graced with the release of the daring new action comedy film Gotcha. To give you an estimate of how well the content of this film aged, it's directed by the guy who directed Revenge of the Nerds and actually stars one of the same actors from that movie as well. It's about this guy Jonathan who's unreasonably obsessed with playing a campus-wide assassination game at his college. In America, I don't think these games are very common anymore due to the increasingly poor optics of bringing fake weapons to school, but I remember seeing colleges doing them as late as at least 2014 when I visited Western University and saw students playing a variant called Zombies. Usually this is done with toy guns, whether Nerf or paintball. There's a recurring bit on Community involving an assassination game with paintball guns, if anyone remembers that. Anyway, Jonathan's campus is running an assassination game called Gotcha, because you say gotcha when you assassinate someone.
Gotcha.
He's really into Gotcha, like really annoyingly into it. Like, it kinda comes across like it's the only thing he has in life. Obviously, there's a bit of a dark miasma hanging over all the parts at the beginning where he's running around with a gun on a college campus, especially with the red paintball pellets, but it's also just like, damn man, you don't got anything else better to do? Like, he's hiding in trash cans, jumping over railings, even pretends to be disabled? And the guy he shoots here is like, what the hell, man? And rightfully so! Imagine being friends with this guy in college, and that's not to mention that his only other character trait is, like, being a loser and a virgin? He's always trying to get girls to go out with him, and his approach is just terrible, and by the end it doesn't really seem like he's learned anything about women at all besides how to do the monkey. He's also clearly from a very rich family who has servants, just in case his passion for gunplay was making him a little too likable. Anyway, he travels to Europe with his pervert friend Manolo, and there's a very bizarre scene where a taxi driver speeds down the highway. It's clear they couldn't afford to shoot a bunch of stunt driving scenes, so they just had the taxi drive somewhat aggressively and then sped up the footage in a way that's super obvious and not convincing at all.
You boys are in a hurry? What? Hurry? No, it's okay. You can just take your time. Oh, man. Oh, you bastard. Get out of my way.
Hey, where'd you learn how to drive? East LA?
They even went so fast that after they got out of the car, they're still in sped up mode for one shot. In Paris, Manolo and Jonathan split up to go creep on the local women, where Jonathan meets and quickly forms an intimate relationship with a woman named Sasha, who's really interested in Jonathan, like really weirdly interested in specifically his status as a young virgin. Seriously, she goes on and on about this.
I like boys who are 17, 18. I like virgins. It is so exciting to me to touch boy the way no woman ever touched him before. It is a feeling of power.
Jonathan's so smitten that he splits off from Manolo and follows Sasha on her work trip to East Berlin. Turns out Sasha's an operative for the CIA, using Jonathan as a cover as she smuggles a mysterious roll of film across the border. She gets kidnapped and Jonathan has to take the role of the spy, the bit being that he can apply the skills he learned playing Gotcha in a situation with real guns instead of paintballs. He's on the lam from these sinister Russian spies for a very lengthy portion of the film, including this jump off a castle wall into a moat that surely got everything in his bag, including the film roll soaked and ruined. They even make a point of showing later that his camera got filled with water, but everything else is fine somehow. It's funny, in a trailer for this film I found online, you can blatantly see the stunt bag at the bottom of this jump, although I don't know if this trailer was ever shown in this aspect ratio. Jonathan hitches a ride with a German glam rock looking band called Cool Cult, and eventually makes his way back to the States with the bad guys in tow.
The JI's one bad dude.
Yeah, well, look, there are a couple of bad dudes that are chasing us right now. Can we go a little faster, please?
Bad dudes? He meets up on his college campus with Sasha, who's somehow also there. I really honestly don't know how she got out of the clutches of the Russians. It's never explained as far as I can tell. Jonathan grabs an animal tranquilizer gun that was set up earlier in this weird scene to bite back at them on his own home turf. He saves the day, returns the film to the CIA, and makes out with Sasha a bit. Then there's this insane ending scene where he makes another pass at a girl who rejected him at the beginning of the movie. She tells him to piss off again, and he retaliates by shooting her in the ass with the tranquilizer gun like an escaped zoo animal? What happened after this freeze frame? Did he go to jail? Was this an okay thing to do in the 80s? The credits roll, and we learn that the role of Chinese man was played by a guy named Peter Pan. Overall, I found it entertaining, but it's a pretty mediocre film that has aged poorly since its release in the 80s, and looking at reviews from that time, it wasn't really liked that much back then either.
So I give Gotcha 2 stars, and I'm Roger Ebert.
Credit where it's due, though, it got a handful of genuine laughs out of me, and I think if it had leaned into the comedic aspect more and not tried to take its ridiculous premise even remotely seriously, it could have been a lot better. Gotta mention the soundtrack, too, which has some decent original songs, including the title track, Gotcha, which is extremely 80s and a bit of an earworm. So this stupid movie is in all our brains now. Great. What does that have to do with Gotcha the sport? The cartridge art, packaging, manual, and game itself have essentially nothing to do with the film in them, save for the paintball aspect and a singular line of text. Copyright 1985, Universal City Studios Inc., all rights reserved. Gotcha was a Universal movie that came out in 1985, and all the other interactive titles are based on existing properties and state their respective license holders in that exact spot on the cartridge, including Jaws, which was also Universal. Looking at this extremely radical poster featuring the Rollin' Rocker, I can just barely make out Gotcha, licensed by Merchandising Corporation of America, floating in an ocean of copyright information at the bottom, which is a company that's also mentioned on the cartridge. This all but confirms to me that the game and toy lines were indeed a brand deal with the Gotcha movie, which makes it all the more baffling that they didn't seem to have anything to do with each other aside from the common theme of paintball. Paintball isn't even that prominently featured in the movie. Maybe LJN just didn't have a ton of faith that the film's reputation would be something worth wearing on their sleeve and decided to run with that one small aspect in a different direction. Whatever happened there, I must say Gotcha has got to be categorically the weakest franchise I've ever seen. One very tenuous connection between a forgotten 80s action comedy, a misguided line of toy guns, and a mediocre NES Zapper paintball simulator. It's not exactly the MCU. The Wikipedia pages for the game and the movie don't even mention the connection at all, despite them both appearing in the paintball category template at the bottom of the page. Looking around at comments online, it seems almost nobody noticed this brand deal even happened in the first place, leaving mere cobwebs of a legacy and the odd elderly eye injury in its wake. I had a lot of technical issues with Freedom Force. I think it's cursed. Not only was it difficult to find in stores considering its typical going rate online, but the ones I found were always in terrible condition. The copy I ended up getting is still a little beat up, but at least it usually eventually works. It also says OID on the back. This is likely the remnants of the word void from a tamper-evident seal from some kind of rental store, like this one on my copy of one of the games we'll see later in the video. All my searching and testing seemed to be worth it though when I started the game and saw this kick-ass opening cutscene. This is genuinely some really nice looking stuff for the NES, forgiving that glitchy looking helicopter explosion, and in my opinion is kinda where the game peaks, even setting aside my personal woes. This cutscene sorta reminds me of Ninja Gaiden, not just in the sense that it's badass and visually impressive for the time, but in the way they cleverly avoided rendering an entire screen's worth of detail, instead opting for a stylishly letterboxed slice of the screen. The gameplay comprises 5 levels of shooting galleries that take place in an over-the-top 80s action movie setting, following the actions of Rad Rex and, if you're playing the 2-player mode, Manic Jackson, who the game and manual refer to as Terminators. You're taking down a group of extremist guerrillas called the Unknown Guerrillas, who have taken over an airport led by the crafty and cunning Eugene Extreme. The first 4 stages take place in and around the airport, and then you go to the guerrillas' hideout for the final stage, which inexplicably and randomly crumbles into rubble when you kill enough of Eugene's goons. You'd think you'd kill Eugene himself, but he only appears a few times to safely taunt you from behind a hostage. I guess this building just had poor infrastructure, and a few of those bullets knocked enough crucial supports loose to make the whole thing come tumbling down. Then Rad Rex, or Manic Jackson, stares into your soul while badass music plays, and a sexy lady materializes out of thin air to give him a smooch with a simple congratulations. I really hate looking at Rad Rex's face sprite for this long, and ever since a YouTube comment pointed out that he looks like Fade Routha as portrayed by Sting in the 1984 David Lynch adaptation of Dune, I can't unsee it. I mean, look at the collar too! What? The lady that appears here is not mentioned anywhere in the game or manual as far as I can tell, so Lord knows why she shows up now, but you can probably safely assume she was one of the hostages or something. There's a lady on this extremely radical box art too, but she doesn't really resemble the one in-game at all. Looking at a beta build of this game I somehow got my hands on, it looks as though this art is just a representation of an earlier character design that got changed for whatever reason. The story loops endlessly upon completion and increases the difficulty after the first run. It seems like reaching the ending a third time is the intended end of the game because you get a little bit of extra dialogue saying, "You are awesome, Rad, how can I make it up to you?" Saucy! There's also a little Easter egg here if you plug in a traditional controller and press A. The words Hiro-kun come up, which appears to be a cheeky reference to Sunsoft programmer Hiroaki Higashiya. Now you may be wondering what secret word means. Well, for the first 3 game clears, each ending gives you a secret word, which is actually part of a mail-in offer included in the manual. If you play this game enough to learn all 3 of the secret words, you can fill out a little form and send it to Sunsoft Decals on 2250 Elmhurst Road in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, to claim your free Freedom Force self-adhesive decal set. Hilariously, in the scan of the manual I found online, it seems some comedically gifted child has scrawled poop, pee, and butt as the secret words. The actual words found in-game are Spy Hunter, Xenophobe, and Platoon, which are the names of 3 Sunsoft published NES ports of arcade games that are all on the back of the entry form in the manual. Lord knows if anyone ever actually redeemed these, because I was unable to find a single trace of them online, not even a mention or a single image of the actual decals, let alone a listing to buy them. Looking at the address of what was once Sunsoft Decals reveals a still standing but old-looking building that is now the home of Gamer Mats, a company that manufactures playmats for tabletop games. I also couldn't help but notice Discount Paintball a few doors down. Not only did I have a lot of trouble finding a working copy of the game, but there were also a litany of strange technical issues getting in my way once I got it running. Now, going into the issues is going to force me to finally outline how exactly the zapper works. You see, whenever you pull the trigger in a Zapper game, the screen flashes black for a frame. Then it puts up little white squares around where each target is, frame by frame, until the Zapper reports that it detected white light coming out of the screen. Despite being, Jesus Christ, 40 years old, this thing is a pretty outstanding and well-designed piece of tech, and can have this conversation of information between the light receptor in the gun and the console drawing the graphics at extremely high speed and precision. It's so fast that if, while cycling through the targets, the Zapper detects a hit, the NES just goes, "Say no more, fam," and stops drawing them. This is why sometimes it appears to the naked observer watching in real time like some of the targets in a game don't have hitboxes. This method of differentiating what target's being detected based on what frame the gun sees white is really astounding to think about and usually works quite well. I say usually because in my experience it's not totally reliable. Sometimes it gets the targets mixed up for whatever obtuse technical reason. This is something that matters very little in games like Duck Hunt and Gotcha the Sport, where if the game kills an enemy you weren't aiming at, it's quite simple to just pull the trigger additional times at the enemy you already have in your sights, but it matters a lot more in games like Hogan's Alley or Freedom Force, where there are targets that penalize you for hitting them. In Freedom Force, the guerrillas have captured legions of hostages, like seriously so many of whom look like Fiona from Shrek. And listen, Fiona from Shrek is awesome, but I shot her a lot of times in this game. She's green, just like the standard goons. There's also a bunch of random civilians walking around in levels 3 and 4 to get in your way, including multiple children, and you can just shoot kids to death in this game. I know you get punished for it, but that's pretty grim. Oh god, and in the head, too? Jeez, man. The little blood splatter that happens when you shoot enemies is pretty gory by the NES's standards in the first place, and now you put children in as valid targets? What's funny is that one of the innocent bystanders is completely invincible, the bathing beauty who the manual plainly states is immune to bullets. And yep, no white rectangle there. Sounds like she should be the one taking down the gorillas instead of Rad Rex and Manic Jackson. Killing innocents fills your error meter, a bit of a cold and distant way of indicating you murdered a living, breathing human being seeing if you ask me. When the error meter fills up, you instantly lose, and it doesn't reset between levels, which led to more than a few frustrating game overs that didn't really feel like my fault, but rather the fault of the Zapper's occasionally inconsistent hit detection. The real killer was that, and this is a truly baffling issue, the enemies didn't always have that white hit detection box around them at all. And I'm not just talking about the bathing beauty. It's pretty easy to see in real time, but you can also go frame by frame to confirm it. Sometimes the enemies would just become totally impossible to kill. What the hell? I didn't see anyone else online reporting the issues, so I started troubleshooting.
Because I was having trouble shooting.
At first it seemed like, bafflingly, swapping from the orange Zapper to the gray one resulted in targets appearing more frequently, but I think that was just confirmation bias messing with me. The issue would sporadically come and go throughout the game, and then every time I got to the third level, it would start happening without fail and I'd die almost instantly to the invincible enemies. The ones with automatic weapons in particular can melt your health bar in the blink of an eye if left to their own devices. My next idea was that there was something wrong with the game cartridge, which would make some amount of sense given its difficulty running, but to my astonishment, when I loaded it up on my EverDrive, the issue persisted at level 3 yet again. In the end, it turned out that it was my NES top loader causing the issue. See, I was using a fancy schmancy later model of NES where you slot the games into the top like a SNES or an N64 instead of the weird sideways toaster of the original NES model. These top loaders are usually a bit more expensive than the usual NES model, but they're much better at reading game cartridges, with the caveat that natively they use coaxial or RF output rather than the original design's AV. RF is such an ancient cable type these days that a lot of NES enthusiasts get their top loaders modded to output using either an HDMI cable or the same type of AV cables that the SNES and N64 use. I have a used modded one with AV, and I can only assume this had something to do with these issues because testing it on my other NESs totally fixed it. It still baffles me that something like this happened at all, and I can't even really hazard a guess as to why my top loader would cause an issue like this. There are many oddities that come with the way NES games are displayed on a CRT, like interlacing, scan lines, and its peculiar frame rate, and I don't feel qualified to diagnose the issue. I don't want to harp on about it too long, it already derailed enough of my stream as it stands, but it was a really frustrating issue and it was a relief to find a solution. I'd be remiss in my duties to neglect talking about the famous light bulb trick here too. Zapper folklore says if you point the light gun at a light source besides the TV, you can trick the gun into detecting a hit without actually needing to aim, which seems like sound logic. If the only thing the gun is checking for is what frame it sees light, surely pointing it at a light source would hit the first available target every time. I remember in the AVGN's NES Accessories episode, he reported that he couldn't get the trick to work, and in my experience trying it on several different light sources throughout my life, I haven't had much more luck than he did. When I was streaming Duck Hunt, I was able to get it to work, but at an extremely low rate of success, like maybe 1 in every 20 or so shots hitting. This was at the very least a higher success rate than the control group of firing the gun into the palm of my hand, but still certainly not a viable method for cheesing a Zapper game. I had a hunch it had something to do with the types of lights being used, but figured it wasn't really something I could ever debunk for certain. Then, during a later part of making this video, I stumbled upon the patent information for the Zapper, which actually makes explicit mention of the light bulb trick. It's written in a redundancy-saturated kind of legalese, but to abbreviate it to the essentials, it says it's common among light guns to provide a filter that makes a point of detecting a certain specific wavelength of light common in televisions while excluding others. This is apparently accomplished with a coil and a capacitor, but I'm not nearly well-versed enough in electrical engineering to understand it any further than that. The patent also specifically mentions that certain illuminators output a similar wavelength to that of televisions at the time, so it's my assumption that certain light bulbs are much better at this trick than others. This, I think, explains the light bulb trick's origins and its shortcomings, as well as probably explaining why the Zapper doesn't work on a lot of modern screens. It's the wavelength thing combined with the fact that most modern screens operate on a slight delay that throws off the intricate and precise informational exchange between the Zapper and the NES. I've heard of people modding Zappers and/or screens to overcome these factors, but you're still probably better off getting a real CRT for Zapper games to avoid a lot of hassle. Armed with a properly functioning setup, it was still a pretty brutal game to beat. I was barely able to get through one loop after numerous tries, but the increase in difficulty on the second loop mixed with the fact that your health doesn't even get filled back up from the first loop made me give up pretty quick on getting what some might consider the true ending. The footage I have here of later loops and the various ending texts was obtained using Game Genie codes. I also found this bizarre level skip code that only works on the first run of the game, where you use the controller to pause, press A 16 plus X times, where X is the number of the current level you're on, then unpause, which instantly clears the level without the need to shoot a single enemy. So for the first level you press A 17 times, and on the 5th level you press it 21 times. It feels like a debugging tool they just didn't bother to take out of the game, and it allows you to get the first ending with a score of 0. Since the ending text after the third game clear specifically mentions Rad Rex by name, I also did a run getting 3 game clears in the multiplayer mode, which is one of those lame multiplayer modes where you take turns doing the levels and compete to get the higher score, to see if there was some custom text for getting the third ending as Manic Jackson. Even though I was using the level skip code for the first clear and Game Genie codes to make myself invincible for the second and third, it was still extremely tedious. It took about half an hour of zapping to complete, and at the end of all that, my disappointment was immeasurable and my day was ruined when I saw that Manic Jackson, despite having his face in the ending cutscene, gets the exact same "You are awesome, rad" message. His expression in this scene suggests to me that it's just now dawning on him that this lady might not be all there mentally speaking. The level-to-level gameplay is functional enough and even fun at times, but it's a very stressful experience for a few reasons. One big factor is this little panel in the bottom right. Shooting this is the only way to obtain health and ammo and various other power-ups. Usually the panel is blank, but every once in a while it flashes one of several things for a brief period of time, and sometimes that period is like, really brief. Look how fast you have to shoot the health kit, and it's that fast every time. Then there's the ammo and the grenade launcher that give you a little more time, but still usually disappear by the time I get my gun aimed at them. The grenade launcher is a screen wipe on your next shot, which I guess is cool, but I didn't really find it practical, seeing as it hits hostages too, and you obviously want to avoid that, which is hard when you have to use it on your next shot without the possibility to store it. Then there are the 2 different gun types, the 38 caliber pistol and the 44 Magnum. The pistol is what you start with, which annoyingly does not prevent it from showing up in the power-up panel and taking up a space where a power-up that actually does something might show up. At least give me an ammo refill when I get the gun I already have. I'm also unsure what the 2 different guns actually do. All it says about the Magnum in the manual is, and I quote, "This is a big gun and it will increase your firepower." Every enemy in the game dies in a single hit, so I don't really know what this actually means. Not only that, but the pistol purportedly has higher accuracy, which I don't think I ever really noticed making a difference. This is the only time in the Zapper catalog that there's been a mechanic that claims to make your shots more accurate. I wondered how this worked and thought maybe it took the white boxes and changed their size depending on what gun you had, but the boxes are the exact same dimensions regardless. Is the Zapper even capable of increasing accuracy without changing what's displayed on screen? I don't know, and I doubt I'll ever find out. I find it hard to believe this entire mechanic is just a lie, but if it exists, it's really hard to notice. Then there's the most messed up option on the power-up panel, this one that says harder with a little gorilla minion on it beckoning to you with a taunting finger. You may have guessed as much, but this one just makes the game much more difficult when you shoot it, to no personal benefit for the rest of that level. And of course, it stays around for a nice long time every time it shows up, much longer than the health power-up. I suppose you could go for this one intentionally if somehow the game isn't already posing enough of a challenge for you, but for most players it's just an annoyance meant to trick you into screwing yourself over. This power-up panel combined with the presence of innocence in the gameplay means you really have to lock in and pay attention when playing, or else you're going to end up making mistake after mistake. I had plenty of runs fall prey to the harder power-up, and for a while I even tried just keeping aimed at the panel at all times, only looking away for a moment to shoot enemies that appear, trying my hardest to get that health power-up, but it only made things worse because then I would shoot a bunch of Fionas on accident because I was paying less attention. In the end, I found the best path to victory was just to focus totally on the enemies and ignore the power-up panel until you're at low ammo, at which point it thankfully shows an ammo pickup that doesn't go away until you shoot it. Be sure to pay attention to this though, because if you run out of ammo before you shoot the panel, it won't work and you can only sit there and watch as enemies gun you down. I also hate this little minigame they give you between some of the levels, Code Breakers. It's basically like shitty Hangman where you have to shoot letters to guess what word the game is thinking of. Bizarrely, the music that plays in the first 2 of these segments is practically identical to a boss theme from Master Blaster, which came out in the same year. Both games are produced by Sunsoft and had the same composer, Naoki Kodaka, so I suppose some music just got reused here. Despite the game's middling quality, Kodaka did a great job on the soundtrack, and while he's not exactly a well-known industry figure, he composed some real bangers for the NES. To name just a few, he's credited on Journey to Silius, NES Batman, and Gremlins 2 The New Batch, which are all highly beloved titles with great music alongside Master Blaster. He also did the music for Fester's Quest, which is less beloved but has some great tunes. He's retired from game composing now and teaches music theory and composition at a university level. Good for him. It's always fascinating thinking about the developers of these games living their lives long after their brief, indirect intersection with your own life through some random video game. Anyway, all that's at stake in this minigame is bonus points, so it's hard to get really worked up about it, but the Zapper just isn't a good tool for selecting letters like this. It flits through the columns and you have to shoot the right letter in the column, but it messes up frequently and doesn't hit the letter you're aiming at about 50% of the time. This inaccuracy, combined with the fact that there's a time limit and you only get 5 misses, means I've almost never won code breakers, but nothing interesting happens if you do, so it's not a huge deal. I dare say it's a worse Hangman minigame than any of the ones in the Danganronpa series, though, and that's really saying something. The Manual of Freedom Force has a page talking all about special characters that show up in each level. Bit of a strange thing to call them because they're more like items or targets than characters. The alleged method to spawn them is, as far as I can glean from the manual and guides, to simply pull the trigger while your score consists of at least 2 digits that match the number of the current level you're on. I say as far as I can glean because according to these rules, these items should be spawning a lot more than they actually do. Most of the time I played this game, I didn't realize this was a mechanic, and then I was alerted to its existence when during one of my off-stream runs I saw a red balloon floating in the air right at the start of the 4th level, which I promptly shot, instantly clearing the level without taking down a single bad guy. What? Turns out this is kind of the craziest one. You can see all the other effects on this list from the manual, which is intentionally vague about what the actual objects are and specifically the effect of the first one. It also fails to mention that the objects only appear in specific spots on each level, making it really difficult to get these to spawn consistently. It's essentially up to luck that your score will be at a certain value at a certain part of the stage. I tried to brute force it by getting a score that had 2 4s or 1s in it, then going to those stages with the level skip code because I knew those items could appear right at the very beginning of the level, but it didn't seem to work. As it stands, I have footage of 3 of them, the plane in stage 2, the balloon in stage 4, and the rat in stage 5, but I could never get the coin in stage 3 or the skull in stage 1 to spawn. There's also a heart here that only shows up in level 4 on the second playthrough, and you know I'm not grinding to get that shit. The skull is pretty funny. That's the one they just listed as having a value of in the manual. It fills your error meter almost all the way so that even a single error will spell death. Like the harder power-up, it just seems like blatant trolling from the developers. One kind of cool thing I gotta mention though is that it appears that some of the Codebreakers minigame words are hints to what these items are. Not that that would actually help you at all, but it's a neat detail. Whew, that was a lot of info for such a seemingly uninteresting game. I still don't really care for actually playing it very much, but there was certainly a lot to talk about, and it's notable for the rare appearance of blood splatter on the NES. There was also apparently a version of this game on a Nintendo vs. System arcade cabinet, but there's very little information about it online. Maybe in that version, Manic Jackson gets his just desserts. Operation Wolf, Take No Prisoners for the NES is what I'd call quintessential used game store core. If you go to any place that's got a remotely decent NES library, chances are they have at least 1 copy of Operation Wolf on display, if not like 10. It must have sold quite well. It's one of many home console ports of the popular arcade game of the same name by Taito, and one of the only ones to actually have functionality with any kind of gun peripheral like the original. This is a military-themed shooter with 6 side-scrolling levels all based around accomplishing a different goal, at least conceptually. The actual goal of every level is to survive, shoot all the bad guys, pick up items, and avoid shooting innocents, like prisoners of war and medical teams. Animals also appear in the background sometimes and grant extra ammunition when shot for some reason. The POWs, specifically, are the supposed main goal of the game. If one of them manages to cross the screen without being harmed, they get rescued and will influence the ending scene of a creepy president congratulating you. That's right, despite the subtitle Take No Prisoners, your literal goal is to take as many prisoners home as possible. The game manual claims that, similar to Freedom Force, you have to loop the game a few times for it to be truly beaten, reaching the creepy president validation results screen 4 times in total. However, it genuinely seems like nobody on the internet has ever noticed or cared because even videos proclaiming Operation Wolf NES full game 100% retro game only go to the first encounter with the president. I sure as hell couldn't be bothered to see if it does anything special. I got through a few of the missions, died, and said next game. I'm gonna be honest guys, I'm not the biggest fan of Operation Wolf for several reasons. First off, the whole military vibe is just not for me. I don't want to sound like too much of a wuss, but I've always found this hyper-violent, jingoistic military stuff in fiction to be kinda off-putting and lame. War is such a nightmare in every way, shape, and form, and there's a weird tonal dissonance that comes with taking the aesthetics of something deadly serious and fucked up, like real, actual wars, and making it into an over-the-top comical power fantasy. There's even a literal comic in the manual, which I gotta admit is pretty rad, even though its contents are as weird and dull as the game itself. I really think even a premise and tone like that of Freedom Force, while very similar at a glance, works a lot better because it's more detached from reality. My second big issue is the way the Zapper is used. I talked briefly in the previous section about how the light gun detects hits, which is how the vast majority of NES Zapper games work, but Operation Wolf appears to function on completely different rules. I'm not qualified to look into the code of the game and try to deduce what's really happening under the hood, but I can tell you what happens frame by frame and then maybe toss out a couple theories as to what the game's trying to do. When you pull the trigger, the entire screen gets tinted white for a frame, after which it goes entirely black with these little white globs shooting quickly across the screen. Once they reach roughly the spot you're pointing at with the Zapper, they stop and a bullet mark is spawned. Now, this is highly speculative, and I will be the first to admit I was wrong if new info comes to light, but my theory is that this bizarre white tinted screen is somehow capable of using the Zapper to select a horizontal row of the screen, which then flashes these white globs from one side to the other until the Zapper detects light, at which point it stops. At first glance, I thought these globs were simply an animation of a bullet coming in from a bizarre kind of first-person perspective, but only now do I realize they're how the game detects a hit at all. Maybe they're intentionally stylistically designed to suggest bullets while also serving that sneakier, more functional purpose. The classic method of hit detection already had the plausible explanation of looking like muzzle flash to those who don't know how the Zapper worked, so this doesn't seem too outlandish to me. This theory of course has a couple vague spots, most prominently how this white tinted screen is capable of detecting where the gun is aimed vertically, and my best guess is that it does this using scan lines. Again, I'm not an expert in this technology, but to my limited understanding of how CRTs display visual information, it's basically this little dot of light moving at unbelievable speeds horizontally across the screen in rows working its way down. I'm just spitballing here, but I figure if the Zapper and NES are capable of telling one frame from another with the light sensor, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to assume it could probably even go a little bit more granular than that, detecting where the scan line is on the screen at the time, and from the way scan lines work, it'd make sense for this to be more feasible working vertically rather than horizontally. So in my proposed model of how Operation Wolf works, the white tinted screen uses scan lines to determine the Y coordinate of the shot, and then the white globs come in from the left side of the screen to determine the X coordinate. Just making more educated guesses here, I'd say they probably did this because of the sheer amount of possible targets on screen at a time. In all my time playing the official Zapper library, I don't think I ever saw more than maybe 4 targets on screen at once. This could be due to some kind of limit to how many it can render at once, but it could also just as easily be something the developers of these games tried to be conscious of because of how noticeable the effect becomes the more the targets increase. It literally takes longer for the hit detection checking process to happen by 1 frame for every target, so I wonder if, in their attempt to be as faithful to the arcade version as possible with its numerous targets on screen at once, they were forced to find a different strategy for detecting hits altogether, and I appreciate that they took the effort to do that. It's just a shame that it doesn't really make for a fun Zapper game. I found myself barely ever hitting targets when I wanted to in this game, and it felt like I had a higher success rate when I deliberately aimed slightly to the right of each enemy. Maybe there's something about it that'd make it all make sense that I just don't know about, but it truly felt atrocious to play with the Zapper, and the open quotes bullets are unfortunately their own little brand of jarring and obnoxious to look at when playing. It probably looks better than it would have if they had gone with the traditional method of hit detection, but it still looks bad. Regardless, thankfully this game comes with a controller-guided crosshair mode like many of these games do, so I was able to play it for long enough to realize it was boring. Almost no music whatsoever, samey levels, kinda stressful, overwhelming gameplay with aggravating sound effects, and the setting was just so cookie cutter. Looking at the arcade game, it's got a little more pizzazz to it due to the more detailed animations, but this console port is rough. There's the occasional cool-looking sprite art in between levels, and the way this little kid walks is fucking amazing, but I wasn't even able to get the kind of detached, ironic enjoyment you can sometimes get out of playing a crappy NES game, which really speaks volumes to how non-exceptional it is as an actual experience. I know this franchise has its fans to this day, but I can only hope they're mostly fans of the original arcade game and its sequels and not this janky port. There's even a 2023 remake on modern platforms like the Switch and the PS5 with full 3D graphics and VR compatibility, and maybe that one's good.
Turrets! Come on, Sarge. Knock them down, like you're bowling.
The Adventures of Bayou Billy.
The Adventures of Bayou Billy, released in 1989, is a modified localization of the Konami-developed Famicom game Mad City, in a pretty standard example of a game getting Westified for American audiences. It's not like they completely overhauled the tone or the plot or anything, but just looking at this hilarious cover art and the new name, it feels emblematic of so many games whose vibes were somewhat botched in the transfer between cultures. Billy himself is proportioned and posed in a way that makes me want to puke with joy every time I see it. It's the total lack of a neck combined with his one cartoonishly large hand and his devious little grin that gets me. This game was pretty heavily marketed, with not only a live-action ad of a guy wrestling a rubber crocodile, but also a run of Archie comics and an appearance on Captain N the Game Master.
Oh, great! My Zapper's got Swampguck in it! Forget the Zapper!
It's quite the ambitious title for such limited hardware, featuring primarily beat-em-up gameplay, but also including a couple Zapper-compatible shooting stages and driving sections reminiscent of Rad Racer. You control Bayou Billy himself, the swamp-themed all-American hero who was raised by a family of gators as he fights his way across Louisiana to rescue his kidnapped sweetheart, Annabelle. The manual has an absolutely beautiful chunk of text that describes the story, which I'll spare you from a full reading of, but pause the video if you like and read through it at your leisure. Basically, they've got every possible stereotype about the American Bayou squeezed into there, and the way the villain, the crime lord Gordon, addresses his ransom letter to Billy as "threateningly yours" is awesome. Anyway, this game is total bullshit. It all comes down to the beat-em-up stages, a genre I confess I've never really been able to wrap my head around, and I've played a lot of them at this point. I know most of these games have damageless runs somewhere on YouTube, but I've never really understood how you're supposed to avoid getting hit constantly when typically your only way to damage enemies is to stand within their hitting range. This is bad enough when enemies in more detailed beat-em-ups have a brief wind-up animation before their attack, so the game can at least pretend it gave you a fair chance to avoid the hit, but Bayou Billy is granted no such luxury. These guys just attack you in one frame with no wind-up the instant you're within range. I found that when you don't have a weapon in this game, the best strategy to beat standard enemies is basically just to spam the jumping kick over and over until you get a weapon, like the whip, a throwing knife, a pistol, and as the manual calls it, the ugly stick. And even then, some armored enemies will laugh off attacks from weapons until you beat the armor out of them with your fists and feet. It's pretty brutal, and the limited health, lives, and continues makes it difficult to even get past the first level. Your one saving grace is that enemies will occasionally drop what the manual refers to as raw meat, despite the fact that it is obviously cooked, which heals you to full when collected. Thankfully, the first of the two Zapper stages, or the gun system as the manual calls it, happens right after the first level, so after much consternation I was able to at least see what the actual Zapper portion of the game was like, and thankfully it's pretty good. It's a lot like Gotcha the Sport, being a side-scrolling shooting gallery in a jungle crawling with enemies. There are a few items that are pretty standard for games like this, like bullet refills, armor, health kits, collected by shooting of course, which obviously doesn't make a lot of sense, but we give it a pass because come on, we're shooting at our TV with a toy gun and the bad guys are falling down. That's badass. There's also this star that clears the screen of enemies, this little one-up Billy doll that goes unmentioned by the manual, and an hourglass item. Now, gamers in the audience, what would be your first guess as to what the hourglass item does here? It freezes time, right? Well, no, it prevents your bullet supply from diminishing. Weird. This is like Castlevania having hearts as a currency instead of health. It just feels like a total non sequitur to those of us familiar with what is nowadays pretty basic video game shorthand. The amount of bullets you use is rarely of any concern anyway, especially because landing a hit on an enemy doesn't actually deplete your supply. Or rather, it looks like it depletes one bullet and then instantly refunds it. This shooting segment is a lot easier than the first stage, with the Zapper at least. There's actually an option on the main menu to play the shooting segments with a cursor you move around with the controller rather than the Zapper, which is definitely a bit awkward but still doable and relatively fun. This level culminates in a basic but cool fight with a helicopter, and then you get dumped back into a beat-em-up level topped off with a boss fight against this big Zangief-looking guy that tosses you around like a pizza pie. This boss was as far as I was personally capable of getting in this game. I got pretty close to beating him a couple of times, but I wasn't able to seal the deal and lost patience with redoing the whole level every time I wanted a shot at him, and redoing the whole first part of the game every time I ran out of continues. In a haze of both frustration and curiosity, I used my NES EverDrive to try out Mad City, the Famicom game that Bayou Billy is a localization of, because I'd heard it was a lot easier, and wow, it sure is a lot easier. I was able to breeze through the whole game with little to no trouble in about 20 minutes. In this version, enemies take more damage and do less damage to you, and the level layouts are somewhat different. Bayou Billy has multiple sections that won't let you pass without fighting these obnoxious crocodile enemies that have a ludicrous amount of health and bounce around annoyingly in the water, impossible to damage for 90% of the time. But in Mad City, you can just walk right past them, almost like the designers never originally intended them to be fought in the first place. The Zapper sections seem about the same difficulty, with the caveat that in Bayou Billy, Game A is the mode where you use the Zapper and B is played with a controller, whereas in Mad City, it's the other way around for some reason. Anyway, the rest of the game is pretty decent, and I can imagine it was a delight to Japanese players in the 80s. The driving sections are visually impressive, and the bosses in particular stand out to me, like this one at the end of the second shooting section against, as they're called in the Bayou Billy manual, Lightning Rod and Schwartz N. Eiger. All the enemies have hilarious names like this, such as Hurricane Hank, Thugs McGraw, Jacques Killstow, Marty Gras, Louis Torture, Swamp Gas Charlie, and Migraine Mike, with migraine spelled wrong in both the manual and the enemy roll call at the end of the game. A bunch of these guys show up in the Archie comics too, as you might expect. At the end of the final beat-em-up section at the plantation, you fight the shockingly nimble Godfather Gordon, who's honestly much easier than the grappler guy, especially if you have the armor that makes his bullets bounce harmlessly off your chiseled chest. Immediately after this, you fight the real final boss against the two heirs to his throne, Rocky and Rocco. At least that's who I'm assuming these guys are, because the sprites for them in-game look absolutely nothing like how they do in the Bayou Billy manual, and don't even make an appearance at all in the Mad City one, even though several other things like the animal enemies appear exclusively in this version. And hey, there's the one-up item I mentioned before. I don't really know what the exact process was for localizing a game like this, and Lord knows there's not a lot of documentation surrounding its developers, so this might remain a mystery forever. In fact, in both versions of the game, the credits are filled with what I can only assume to be pseudonyms, such as Grasshopper Ogawa, Moon Nakamoto, and Soup. This was unfortunately a common practice in the 80s, as companies wanted to keep the names of their employees private for fear of them getting hired by competing studios. They forced them to adopt pseudonyms or use initials instead of their full names, or worst of all, simply didn't credit them at all. It was a dark time where game developers were treated more like company assets than artists, and it's a real shame because they deserve to be credited for their work as much as anyone else, not to mention making it a pain in the ass for future gaming historians to figure this type of stuff out. Many developers took to hiding secret credits in the games they worked on out of frustration at their corporate overlords. The most well-known example is probably the Atari 2600 game Adventure, where developer Warren Robinette hid a secret room with his name on the floor, often referred to as one of the earliest Easter eggs in gaming. The cutting room floor has an enormous list of over 2,000 games with hidden developer credits, some of which are just sitting somewhere in the code and some accessible through cheats or specific in-game actions. We just saw something similar to this in Freedom Force with the hidden Hiro-kun message. Mad City and Bayou Billy, sadly, have no such feature, meaning we may never know who made this game in full. Okay, got a little sidetracked there, but after you beat the two final goons in a thrilling match of walk around the room in circles kiting them with the overpowered whip weapon for 2 minutes, you walk to the right and Billy's sweetheart Annabelle comes out to reward him with a loving embrace. When I was playing this, I noticed I could still control Billy during this small scene like it was a Valve game or something. What a strange detail that they programmed this scene in such a fashion, when surely it would have been much easier to just freeze the player in place when Annabelle walks over to them, I thought. Well, thanks again to the cutting room floor, I learned that this is actually a behavior unique to the Famicom game, and it does freeze you in place in the NES version. Not only that, but Mad City has an alternate ending that happens if you avoid Annabelle for a few seconds, where she basically goes, "Oh, you don't like me? Okay, bye, I guess." And then the credits roll with an image of this empty arch instead of showing the two of them embracing under it. That's amazing, and that's not all. What if I told you there are actually 4 possible endings to this game? If you hold up and select right after Annabelle hugs you, the ending cutscene of the two sweet-talking each other changes to be a little more awkward and makes Billy seem a little too eager to kiss Annabelle. The dialogue here is also changed from standard Japanese to a Kansai dialect, which is kind of like the Japanese equivalent of a southern twang. What a bizarre Easter egg. That just leaves the last ending, which is a bad ending without Annabelle that happens if you beat the game using any of the bonuses you get from training mode. Wait, what? What bonuses? Well, if you select training from the main menu, you get the option to do a simplified practice course of each type of stage in the game, and completing each one actually gives you a bonus item to take into the main campaign. The driving stage gives you an extra life, the shooting stage gives you extra bullets, and the beat-em-up stage gives you a meatball. Thanks. This meatball acts like a bizarro Americanized version of a fairy in a bottle, healing you to full when your health reaches 0, which is more or less just like getting an extra life. One of the few small mercies afforded to Western players is that in Bayou Billy this bad ending doesn't exist, and you can use all 3 of the bonuses to make the game a little more manageable, although not by much. The issue of the sharp increase in difficulty in localization is a big can of worms to crack open. Often you'll hear people say that changes like this were made due to the prevalence of the American rental market, and I think it did play a role here, but honestly this topic has so many caveats to it that delving deeper into the subject would probably add about an hour of runtime to this video, and I think I want to save it for a future video dedicated entirely to the topic of regional differences in video game difficulty. The essential information with regard to this game, in my humble opinion, is that the NES version is basically ruined by the increase in difficulty. I didn't even get very far in, but looking at the way people talk about this game online, it doesn't let up as the game goes on, with people citing the second driving section in particular as a source of frustration. Look at how much thinner the road is and how many more hazards there are in comparison to the same level from Mad City. It's funny, going into this game I was bracing for it to be a real piece of shit, and while I think to a certain degree the butchered Western version is pretty bad for a lot of reasons, Mad City is actually quite a cool game all things considered, and is shockingly feature-rich and enjoyable for an NES title. It's got a lot of awesome sprite art, the music is great, and it has a ton of personality and weird little details that the developers absolutely did not need to put into it. I'd consider it top-shelf Kusuge at this point, and trust me, nobody is more shocked at my affection for this weird, stupid game than I am. Probably the least interesting or exceptional game on this list, Shooting Range couldn't even seem to muster the energy to think of an interesting title. There are 2 modes, Normal Game and Party Game. Normal Game comprises the bulk of the game's content, with 3 themed stages where you scroll back and forth with the controller like Gotcha the Sport, and shoot targets held up by various characters. The first stage is a desert with cowboys and Indians, no comment. The second is a spooky mansion with monsters, and the third is on some kind of desolate planet with various aliens, including the NES staple of simply putting a xenomorph from Alien into your game without getting the rights to it. In between the second and third stages, you get a little bonus stage where you shoot bottles on a shelf. This is by far the most fun part of the entire game. You can only hit them when they're flashing, which is a little overwhelming at first, but when the bottle's numbers start to dwindle and you get into the rhythm of the flashing, you feel like a badass taking down bottle after bottle. It's a shame then that this stage is the only one of its kind, lasts less than a minute, and can only be played after slogging through the first 2 levels. The space level culminates in a very basic boss fight with this tentacled beast who you shoot a bunch and then that's your lot. This game mode just makes my arm tired more than anything else, and it's annoying using the controller to scroll back and forth over these tiny spaces repeatedly. The second game mode, Party Game, consists of a single screen where you shoot at this whimsical contraption with targets coming out of it. At the beginning, and every time you miss a shot after that, you need to hit one of these flashing lights at the top, and then it makes these same Umbrella Corporation logo targets from the other mode pop up from the bottom of the machine over and over until you miss again. It goes on for way too long and gets boring very fast, and at the end you get a results screen and a little message congratulating you if you did well enough. The best one was in Party Game where it said, "You are an average player to my 95% hit ratio." You are an average player! No, guys, you're supposed to say the perfect player. What are you doing, man? My Twitch chat's gonna roast me. This was also a game like Freedom Force that bugged out when running through my top loader. I discovered a bizarre exploit that only seems to work in party mode, where if you simply point the gun at the screen and pull the trigger repeatedly and rapidly, it somehow hits every target without fail, and analyzing the footage, it seems like the majority of the time the targets don't even have that telltale white square around them when you do this. Beats me why this happens, but I was able to get a 100% hit rate and a bugged out score display by pointing my gun at the corner of the screen and spamming the trigger the whole time. Thanks, top loader! This game's main menu boasts multiplayer support up to 4 players, but before you get too excited, it's just the same kind of multiplayer we saw in Freedom Force where you take turns competing for a higher score. A lot of NES games had this kind of multiplayer, the most notable example being Super Mario Bros., and it's so lame by today's standards of what multiplayer can be. Imagine busting this out at a friend's house and being like, "Hey everybody, let's play party mode," and then everyone just sits there in stony silence while one player shoots samey targets for 2 minutes at a time 4 times over. Even the menus are boring and awkward to navigate. Lots of Zapper games have an elegant simplicity to their menus, being entirely operable with no controller. You shoot off screen to scroll down the options and then shoot at the screen to hit confirm. No such luck in Shooting Range. Some of them use the controller, and some of them use the gun. It's not the worst thing I've ever played, but it feels like something you'd expect to have come out at the launch of the NES, rather than 4 years later in 1989. Maybe the Zapper dev kit got lost in the mail on the way to the Bandai offices. Really dull and unexceptional. Next! This one might be my least favorite of the bunch. There were a lot of sports games on the NES, and especially a lot of games about track running and the Olympics, which strikes me as bizarre because it doesn't really seem like a subject that makes for a good video game. I know in the modern age we have Mario and Sonic for some reason competing against each other in the Olympics, and I haven't played those games, so maybe they're the fully realized magnum opus of this concept, but Track and Field 2 is not. This is a localized Japanese game that originally went by the name Konami Sports in Seoul, following up the original Track and Field, which was called Hyper Olympic in Japan. I actually bought the NES Power Pad peripheral in preparation for this game, assuming it was compatible, but turns out I was actually thinking of World Class Track Meet, which is a different game. I've heard some general love for that game and Track and Field 1 on the NES grapevine, but I'd never heard anyone talk about its sequel, and after playing it, I kinda get why. These kinds of games usually primarily feature button mashing as a major mechanic, with different control schemes for each specific type of stadium event. There are 12 main events: fencing, taekwondo, triple jump, pole vault, freestyle swimming, canoeing, high dive, archery, hurdles, hammer throw, horizontal bar, and clay pigeon shooting, which is where the zapper is used. Huh? What do you mean? Okay, well, as it turns out, none of these events are Zapper compatible, so why is it on this list? Well, in between sets of events in the story mode, you get this side mode called Exhibition Events, which has 2 additional games called Hang Gliding and Gun Firing. When I first saw this menu, I thought you had to choose one of the 2 to do only once before the next set of games, but you can actually do them both over and over to your heart's content here, which was a shockingly convenient concession for an old game like this to make. Let's focus on the Zapper part first before we talk about the rest of the game and select Gun Firing. Now, I'm not very sports-brained, and I certainly don't know much about the history of the Olympics, but I feel quite confident that no firearms event quite like this has ever happened at the real Olympic Games. Playable with either a controller crosshair or a zapper, it's a shooting gallery consisting of a single screen that doesn't scroll, and has a total of 5 spawn locations for enemies with very rudimentary animations and behaviors. It is pretty funny the way 2 of them slide up out of the manhole covers, and I love how this dude in the pink suit pops his head out of the trunk of a car like, "Hey, I'm the frickin' trunk guy over here." Unfortunately, it goes on for way too long, especially considering if you're doing even remotely well, you'll get enough hits to add more to the already slow timer. Why can't you be as fast as Punch-Out seconds? Hell, give me Bayou Billy driving section time units. By my math, those are 41 units to every real-life second, which would mean this section would be over after roughly 1.5 seconds. I guess these Track and Field 2 seconds are actually very slightly faster than real seconds, but I've already hit the impressively low limits of my mathematical abilities, and I refuse to think about it further. When this game mode ends, it flashes the screen red, regardless of if you survived to last out the time limit or if you died from taking too many hits. There's no results screen, and it just unceremoniously boots you back to the exhibition menu. It's remarkably bare bones, which is a shame because the rest of this game has at least a bit of a flair for presentation. The sprite art and animations are really great and surprisingly detailed in certain sections, but it seems like this was one of the modes they cared about making the least. It kind of feels like they just squeezed it in so you could put Zapper functionality onto the box blurb or something, but looking at most promo material for this game, I don't see it mentioned at all. The game actually featured on the cover of the 3rd issue of Nintendo Power with a huge spread about all the events, but only talks about the main 12 and again makes no mention of the exhibitions or the game's Zapper compatibility. This issue also features the very first appearance of Captain N the Game Master, as well as a celebrity profile on Jay Leno, who allegedly called the tip hotline for help on the 7th dungeon of Zelda 1, and even ended up beating the 2nd quest. Damn Jay, you a gamer? Okay! Let's move on to the other events, because there truly is nothing more to say about the Zapper aspect of this game. I won't bore you with the details of each specific one, but let me tell you, the controls are pretty terrible on most of them, and while the graphics look great for the time it came out, it's essentially unplayable. Like I said, there's lots of button mashing. You do it to run, you do it to swim, you do it to pull a bowstring back, and while I'm not a world-class masher, I found that it was extremely difficult to get these meters to go above halfway, even with some pretty furious mashing. This was the rare instance of a game that benefits from the NES Advantage controller with its turbo settings, which I was glad to at least finally get some use out of. The only other time it had ever done anything for me was when I used it to idly farm levels in Zelda 2. When you turn this knob all the way up on the A button, those bars fill right up, and even then the controls are so janky and poorly explained in the manual that I was struggling to qualify in basically any of the events, which is a shame because you need to qualify for the first 3 before you can see the exhibition stuff. I got extremely angry at this game streaming it, specifically the triple jump and freestyle swimming events, and maybe I'm just bad at understanding bizarre control schemes, but it took a lot of doing for me to clear these stages even once, let alone both in a row, and that's using a controller with a turbo function. The first one, fencing, was actually the one I enjoyed the most out of the whole collection, until I realized I could just cheese it by holding block and waiting for my opponent to approach, and punishing any attempt at a hit with a strike of my own. I don't think I ever got punished once for doing this. Then came the triple jump, where you mash the A button to run and then do a little by perfectly timing B button presses 3 times. The thing that didn't click with me for a while here is that the amount of time you hold the B button for determines the angle you jump at. The longer you hold the button, the higher the angle, and you want to stop at about 45 degrees for the best distance. At least that's what Nintendo Power says. Even armed with this knowledge and the NES Advantage, it's tricky to time these button presses optimally, and if you hold the button too long, this dunce just leaps straight up into the air like an asshole. The requirement to qualify is not small, and doing it in the training mode actually gives you a lower requirement than the one needed to pass in the main campaign, Olympic mode, so it's even harder when the pressure's on. Finally, I had to do freestyle swimming, which also involved a lot of mashing and managing this greenish breath meter, which to this day I don't really understand. I took swimming classes as a kid, so I understand where during the different types of strokes you're supposed to take breaths, but trying to do it the way it would work in real life didn't seem effective at all, and I found the manual to be very unhelpful in clearing it up. In the end, I only ended up passing this one because of the speed boost the turbo buttons gave me. It was kind of like the tortoise and the hare, except the hare took a nap and still won. Then, after doing the exhibition games to my heart's content, I instantly lost on the high dive and promptly gave up with the game. I find it hard to believe people playing this game in the 80s did much besides the training mode, because otherwise seeing all the games would be nearly impossible, and even then, they're so stupidly hard and unfun. Even the more unique ones like canoeing and clay pigeon shooting are just brutal. There's also a versus mode where you can only do fencing, taekwondo, and one event unique to multiplayer, arm wrestling, which is also bad but at least has some funny faces in it. And why the hell, if there's Zapper functionality already in the game, couldn't they have made clay pigeon shooting possible to play with it too? Probably because it would have been far easier, seeing as the precision required with the controller crosshair is immense compared to other games with a similar control scheme. This is just a rough one overall, and while I appreciate what these kinds of games are going for, translating the kind of skill and endurance that professional athletes utilize into game controls, I just don't think it makes for a compelling experience and just ends up being frustrating and awkward and painful to your thumbs. Another bizarre choice is that the athletes are seemingly fake. I assumed looking at their names and portraits that they'd be based on real-world athletes, and maybe they are, but just with the names changed, but looking into the records, I didn't find a single name that matched up to an actual Olympic athlete. 1988 or any other year. Certainly not D. Thang from Kenya, that's for sure, not to be confused with the rapper of the same name. We are legally required to make the distinction. It's not good, and barely a Zapper game, and the crowd sound effect ends in this annoying little simulated whistle sound that drives you insane from how frequently it's played. Next! Hey guys! So, the more astute among you may have deduced from the video's runtime that despite the complete history in the title, I'm only about halfway through these games and the video's about to end. That's because I horribly underestimated the amount of time it takes to make an enormous video essay like this. I thought it'd be so cool to just out of nowhere drop a 3-hour-long video essay as my first foray into the genre, but making it to my own standards of quality has been such a lengthy and exhausting process that I decided to chop it in half so my channel can actually make a little bit of revenue before the end of the year viewership boom runs dry. Sorry if that's left you with blue rollin' rockers, but rest assured the second half will come and almost certainly more video essays after that. They definitely won't all be in the same style or format, but I've got a lot of what I think are great topics to discuss, and I'm already working on scripts for a few of them that I'm particularly interested in. I normally don't plug my Patreon, but if you'd like to see numerous sneak peeks into what I'm working on in the future, including the second half of the Zapper History, consider donating $5 a month to gain access to the Grapefruit Patreon Discord server. Yeah, I know, Discord server, but you can see tons of video development updates and additional content and fun tidbits you don't see in the videos, and you even get to influence what I work on in the future via polls and feedback. We also do lots of voice chat gaming sessions and very occasional Discord exclusive live streams, and the icing on the cake is you get to see frequent pictures and videos of my cute chinchillas. Okay, now I've got a few shoutouts I'd like to give for some people and places that were instrumental in making this video. BeforeMario.com for a lot of info and images concerning pre-video game boom Nintendo stuff. Pink Gorilla, Hi-Fi Lo-Fi, and Al's Music Video and Games for the footage I filmed in their stores. The Cutting Room Floor for a bunch of hidden knowledge about games. It's seriously such a cool website, you have to check it out. Nico's 8-bit stereo for the high-quality rips of lots of the music used throughout. The Spriter's Resource for some of the sprites used in the video and thumbnail. Longplay channels, NintendoComplete, and World of Longplays on YouTube for some games and scenarios I didn't cover in my streams, although plenty of B-roll of other games is also from my own back catalog of old VODs. NintendoComplete in particular came in clutch with an English subtitled video of all of Mad City's endings. Or Landu's Arcade for supplying me with a picture of the Versus Freedom Force cabinet. That was seriously cool, considering just how little information or documentation there is on that game online. I'm pretty sure that picture you saw there is totally unique to this video and doesn't appear anywhere else on the internet, which is kinda wild. Rice Nut for supplying me with a folder of assets from his classic Bone vids. I'm sorry I just ended up using Bones as a rant Sona for parts of the video, but he's just too good. My good friend and channel regular Lark for sprucing up the thumbnail into something much more polished and exciting. My lovely fiancée Bella for supporting me through my Zapper psychosis from day one. And of course, to all my Patreon patrons. You're seeing the ones who got past my evil and insidious $10 paywall, but even the ones who just toss me $1 every month, it means the world to me that any of you deem me worthy of supporting financially, and I'm gonna keep doing my best to make your generous donations worth it. It's a rough economy out there, so your support means more to me now than ever before, even if it's just a tiny little bit. So from the bottom of my heart, thanks. Looks like that's all the time we've got today, but be sure to tune in to the next video. The second half's got a lot of great stuff in it, including bootleg Zapper games, more janky peripherals, and the 2 best games in this collection by far. Lots to discuss. You won't want to miss it. See ya!